Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Joining me tonight is Ben Kinsley, who's co-host and co-producer, and our special guest is Rob Roper from Ethan Allen Institute, and you're president?
I am president.
I love that title. I want to be president. Welcome. This is your first time on the show.
It is. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for
Good to see you,
being
Ben.
here.
Yeah, Betsy Bishop is president. I like that better than chair
of
the
chamber.
I like that president.
Yeah.
It's short, but that's good.
Yeah, it's a little better than executive director, which is sort of the same thing.
That's what I think. So we always ask our guests to tell a little bit about themselves, and would you mind just giving us a little bit of your background?
No, sure. I've been in Vermont for, it's going to be 20 years in this July, so a big anniversary coming up for me. My wife and I moved here when she was pregnant with our first child because we wanted to raise our kids in Vermont. She had some family up here. So we weren't coming into something completely unknown. And it never looked back. I mean, we were both working in New York City. I was on Madison Avenue in the advertising business. She was not on Wall Street, but she was in the financial business there. And we've settled here, lived in Montpelier for a little while. We live in Stowe now. The daughter was born to us on Election Day.
Oh, stop! Really?
On Election Day, on November 3rd.
Oh, great!
1998, and I can say that I left my pregnant wife in labor in the car while I ran in to vote. So that says things about me that are good and bad.
Yes, exactly. I don't know what I'd be thinking, but that's okay.
And so I got into my background was in communications and advertising, and when I got here, the only person that I knew was the Justice of the Peace who married my wife and me at Hildene in Manchester, and it was Judy Livingston, who also happened to be a representative.
Right.
And came here and said, Judy, I don't know anybody. I'm looking for something to do. My wife is the one who got the job up here that allowed us to come here. So, she said, well, my friend Ruth Dwyer is running for governor, and you should help her. So, without knowing anything about Ruth, I stopped over into her campaign, and I've been involved in politics and Vermont policy ever since. I served for a term as chairman of the Vermont Republican Party, and from there I helped John McClowery start a chapter of Freedom Works, and then took over at the Ethan Allen Institute.
Great.
5 years ago.
Now, what was Freedom Works?
Well, I got that reversed. I did Freedom Works first and then became chair of the party. But no, we did that for 2 years. We had a Freedom Works chapter here for 2 years.
I didn't know that. Excellent. And you were right. You have. We were talking before the show about you've always gone to vote on voting day.
I always
on election day
in the building.
In the building. See, I always do.
Absentee.
Absentee.
Yeah.
So you weren't kidding. Even when your wife was giving birth. You're lucky you survived.
She told me to, in fairness, she told me to do it.
Oh, well, good.
She's like, I'll be okay. You run in.
Well, look at that. We started with.
And she was, because I voted at like 10 o'clock in the morning. She didn't have the baby till 8:30 that night.
Oh, okay. Well, that's, you're lucky.
Exactly.
I had called Rob and asked him to be on the show because I cannot understand net metering at all. And we were looking for somebody to be able to explain this to me in English, I hope. But then when we realized we'd have Rob on the show, we've got a laundry list of things to keep you busy for the hour, maybe two if we keep going. But could you start off with net metering?
Sure, and I think what sparked your interest in this was that's just a blog post that I wrote explaining how net metering was causing our electric rates to go up. There's, Green Mountain Power at the beginning of the year had requested a 5% increase in their rates. And not the entire reason for it, but a big reason for it was net metering. And what net metering is you have to apply for it, but if you put solar power or wind or some sort of renewable energy that you purchase for your house, or it can be a group of people, I think it's up to 500 kilowatt hours that's being produced. I think I have that number right. If you're in the net metering program, you sell that power that you make back to the electric company. And the electric company is forced by law to buy it. And they have to buy it at a rate that is significantly higher than certainly the lowest rates that are out there, such as Hydro-Quebec is about 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And and I think the average rate in Vermont is about 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So you're basically the electric company is forced to buy power that is at a much higher than the market rate. And what do they have to do when they are buying that power at a higher rate? Is that they're selling it to people who aren't in the net metering program at a higher rate. It raises your rates because they have to charge the other customers that.
Right.
And so if you look at, and in a nutshell, that's basically what the program is. And it's regressive in one sense because the people who can afford to do this are the ones who have the capital to put into buying all of the solar equipment.
Right.
And just as another aside, part of the regressivity is that any equipment that you buy for the purposes of putting in net metering equipment is not subject to the sales tax. So they're getting a break.
Wow.
You know, we're picking up their load of the sales tax too, as far as the equipment goes. But if you don't have the capital to put in all this infrastructure, it's impossible for you to participate in this. So wealthier people who can afford to invest in that sort of stuff are the ones that are reaping the benefit, and those other people are paying higher electric rates and also paying for the infrastructure.
What are the electric companies saying? Are they happy about this situation if they're being forced to buy at a higher rate? Because they're very careful about their load and how much power they have and trying to keep the prices down, are they not?
They are, and I think that there is some tension between the electric companies and the people who have an interest either from a climate change perspective or from they sell solar panels. There is a little bit of tension there, and people want to expand it, make it more than 500 kilowatts that would allow you to participate. So bigger programs.
Right.
And there's a cap. There is currently a cap on the amount of people or amount of power. I think it's 15%. That they have to take, and it's done on a first come first served basis. So they're always pushing to expand the cap. But one more figure, and then we can move on to another topic.
Right.
Unless you have any questions that I can answer about it. It's less than 2% of the power that's actually generated in Vermont now is generated through the net metering program, but it accounts for over 6% of the total cost of electricity. So if this grows, it's as the program grows, if it's allowed to grow, it's going to start really pushing up the cost of everybody's bill.
Because they're pushing for people to do this, and I understand the benefits of it, but there's always the cost.
Yeah, if you want more people to have solar panels and stuff, then it's working as intended.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's less affluent Vermonters who are paying the cost.
And for people who
wealthier
don't have
Vermonters
money, aren't
to
there
put
a
in
lot of incentives though to put against the cost of buying the solar panels and
well,
stuff?
there's like the
some
sales
program?
tax exemption. There's also zero interest loans. But again, even with zero interest loans, you have to have something for collateral, or you have to put a down payment.
You got to pay it back, right?
And you got to pay it back, right? And so that's why it does kind of favor upper middle class folks who can afford that upfront investment or a financed investment.
I got it. Thank you for explaining that.
So one question I have off the top of your head, do you know what the rates are for net metering setups versus what the average rate that utilities are charging for delivering electricity? Do you know that?
I think it's a little over 20. I forget if it's 22 cents and change, or I was rounding up to 22. It's about 22 cents is what the net metering people charge the electric company for the power that they put into the system.
Gotcha.
I think the average rate for electricity in Vermont is around 15 cents per kilowatt, and the cheapest rates, if we got more money from Hydro-Quebec is about 6 cents.
Yeah, so it's not even like a 1-to-1 ratio where you're just if you were a net meter, you're charging the electric company the same as what the electric company charges you for delivery. It's not even a 1-to-1. You're actually getting charged. You're getting paid more.
Yes, you're getting paid more than you're being charged,
which is an interesting arrangement.
It's not exactly how they would do it in Economics 101.
Right. Yeah, because even if you think about because one of the arguments I hear for net metering is the grid has storage capacity in terms of there's unused electricity that could be dispersed out into the grid. So you can almost think about the grid as storing it like your battery would store that energy, and then returning that in off hours when the sun's not shining, right? But that analogy would make a lot more sense if it was like a one-to-one exchange, where like, hey, Burlington Electric is charging me 12 cents per kilowatt hour for using their electricity, but if I'm putting electricity back, I'm going to get 12 cents per kilowatt hour because that's what their rate is.
Yeah, if they charge a market rate, it would
Right.
make a lot more. It would make a lot more sense, but it wouldn't.
The economics
carry with
still
it.
may not be perfect,
Yeah,
but at least
would,
it would be.
It wouldn't have the same incentive for people to invest in this
Right.
solar panels or wind
Right.
towers.
Because you don't have that cost differential where you're basically making up the 3 to 5 cents
Yep.
off each kilowatt.
So unless they adjust the cost that the electric companies have to pay, the more people in, the more it's going to cost us.
That's right.
Excellent. Good plan. Oh. Okay, so you put out, which I got a couple of days ago, your first annual town meeting day legislative study electronically, which was very interesting.
We did, and as president of the Ethan Allen Institute, I'll give a plug: ethanallen.org, if you're interested in learning more about what we do. But yeah, when Bill Doyle was no longer serving in the Senate, one of the things I wondered is he going to continue with
Yes,
the Doyle
he
poll?
is.
And he is, and he
Yes,
is
he
continuing
is.
with it. But I also thought, well, this might be something that would be interesting for us to do as well. So we put out a survey. It was 10 questions,
great.
and we marketed it on social media, and we got about just under 500 responses to it over town meeting week. And we asked, what do you think of the direction that Governor Scott is taking the state?
Right.
What do you think of the direction that the legislature is taking the state? Do you approve or disapprove? And asked about the carbon tax, asked
Yeah.
about a lot of the
You've
top
got
10
a
issues.
great
so-
list of things, and we were hoping that we could get your input on this, where you and Ethan Allen's kind of stand on some of these issues. Are you going to publish your report?
Yes, in fact,
Yeah.
I sent it out well, I didn't say where we stand on these issues. We tried to,
Yes,
frame
I
this
know,
in a
yes, right,
non-biased
yeah.
way. Maybe that would be a good thing to say where we stand on these.
I think so. I'm hoping you'll do it now.
Oh no, we could
Yeah,
do that now.
yeah. Because I
mean,
know you've written an awful lot of commentaries, I guess, on this.
yeah, it wouldn't take people very long to figure out
Yeah, I know,
where we
exactly.
stand on a lot of these issues. But okay, how would you like? Would you
Well,
like to ask
I'm
me
just-
our questions?
Yes,
and we can,
well, we're
we
just
can
going to
through
go
it?
down the list, and I've read some of the things you've written
Uh-huh.
about it, so I know kind of where you're standing. But obviously, the minimum wage from $10.50 to $15. What have been your comments on this? Because I've got my own.
Well, I'll tell you how people responded.
Okay.
And then I'll tell you our,
That's it,
our
okay.
position on it. So, it was, do you approve or disapprove? Should lawmakers increase the Vermont state minimum wage from $10.50 to $15 per hour? And yes, 22.13%, or 106 people said yes. 73%, 0.07 said no, 350 people, and don't know was 4.8%, or 23
Interesting.
people. And our position is that no, we should not be raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. First of all, the biggest reason would be because New Hampshire, our neighbor, has a minimum wage of $7.25 per hour.
Wow.
And it doesn't look like they're going to be increasing that anytime soon.
That border
So
issue again, right?
it's the border issue. If
Yep.
you're an employer and you are dependent upon entry level or low wage labor for you run a factory or you run a restaurant or you run a Jiffy Mart or whatever it is, the economics of doing it across the border are going to be significantly better for you.
Right.
So we see it, employers moving across the border the other way. Employees, good employees, might come to Vermont because hey,
Yeah,
I can
make
make
more money. Right.
$10 over
Right.
here. I can make $15 over
Right.
there. So you might see some of that cross
When
pollination.
is this? It's being implemented over time.
Over
What is
time,
the,
it's
Yeah.
6 years. It's
Six
a
years.
6-year layover. I think it's
Yeah.
75 cents a year
Something
until they
like
get to
that.
15.
Because what,
Yeah.
as an HR person, which I was, if I'm working in a company for 3 years and I'm finally making $15 an
Yeah.
hour, and you come in, new guy,
Yeah.
making $15 an hour, I may raise my hand and go,
Oh,
hey.
yeah.
So there's a ripple effect that I'm going to expect.
You're going to expect
a
more
few
money.
extra
and
dollars.
it's going to cost. The cost of labor is going to go up in the state
Pensions,
overall.
cost of pension, cost of health care.
Well-
It all triggers off of,
Well, I'll bring one example that's an unintended consequence of this, and that is childcare, because childcare, they work really hard, but it's not a high-paying
God.
job.
Yeah.
So we have an issue with childcare in the state right now, where they say there's not enough slots and it's not what's there is not
It's not
affordable.
affordable.
Well, if it's not affordable now, and you're paying somebody, 10, well, it's
Oh, I didn't
10.50,
even think of
10.50 an
childcare.
hour,
Right.
and all of a sudden you're paying the childcare worker $15 an hour.
Right.
That's going to make it a whole lot more expensive to get childcare.
Right.
So that's one example of the unintended consequences of them, and I think there are a lot.
When I moved up here from New York, I was blown away by the cost of daycare and food. And where I lived in Bristol, it was a transportation cost to get it to Bristol, because it's not, I think, along Route 7 or whatever. But childcare surprised me, the cost of childcare here. Was more expensive than in New York,
Wow.
believe it or not. Maybe
Yeah, and
because
it's still probably more expensive than New York.
Well, I think because there's so many daycares in New York, they have to be competitive. But here, there's not as many as you said. We have a shortage, I think. So anyway, okay. Next on your list was our favorite here, is the carbon tax.
Oh, love the carbon tax.
On everything. Yes.
This, I must say, was the most lopsided question that we asked. And it should Vermont lawmakers enact a carbon tax on gasoline at 32 cents a gallon, diesel fuel and home heating oil at 40 cents a gallon, natural gas and propane at 24 cents a gallon, with the revenues used to subsidize electric bills, make our electric bills cheaper. And yes, 5.43%, just 26 people. No was 91.02% at 436 people, and don't know was 3.55% at 17 people. So the carbon tax really remains unpopular, no matter what form it takes, be it the original carbon tax that they put forward, the VPIRG plan,
Right.
in the last legislative session, which was 10% skimmed off the top to subsidize
Now, what's the
renewable
latest?
fuels.
Is the
The latest is
Essex-
the Essex
Essex
plan.
plan.
That's the one that's described here, where they take the money and they give it to the electric companies to
Buy down the rates.
buy down the rates of electricity.
Is there any estimate on how much the electricity rates would go down
Under their plan, they say they would go down about 27%.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that that's actually can be accurate, because the cost of implementing this plan is going to be very high. It's very complicated because you have to apply for it. Half of the money would be used to lower electric rates generally, so that's fairly simple. But they have these rebates in there for people who are low income or 300% of poverty or below. And then there's another rebate set that is for people who live in rural areas, who have a household income of less than $150,000. So they have to compute on a monthly basis who qualifies
Oh, wow.
for those rebates, and you have to apply for them. So this is a constant. I mean, it's almost like, very much like the healthcare website,
Right.
where.
Oh,
so
that's what we need, another one of those.
Exactly.
Well,
That's
it's
what
also kind of similar to income sensitivity, because it's
Yeah.
a rebate that allows you to pay based on your income, but you have to apply for it.
you have to apply for it, and you have to be constantly updating the electric company as to what your income is.
And the tax commissioner the other day, when we were interviewing him, said there's no he doesn't have the infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
So they'd have to kind of create a whole infrastructure.
Well, he didn't have infrastructure in place for a per parcel fee.
For parcel fee, but
Yeah.
he wouldn't have it for this either, I wouldn't think.
Well, they say there's some infrastructure in place for this, because you can get electric rebates for being low income.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
So there is a little something in place, but I don't think it really covers the scope
Yeah.
of what they're talking about doing with this. And in the early years, the tax ramps up. It ramps up over an 8-year period, I think. So in the early years, they're probably taking in less money than it would be to cover the cost of implementing the tax. So there'd be no money in the pool for any rebates.
Right.
And if they were successful in weaning people off of fossil fuels, then the money that goes into the pool for the rebates would decrease over time too, to the point where there's no money left in the pool to
Excellent
pay the
plan.
rebates. We're just stuck with the high electricity rates at the end of the
Are we
program.
the highest or one of the highest in electric rates? I don't know.
In
where
the
we
country,
are.
yes.
We
Yes.
were about 5 years ago. We were right up there, and it's actually decreased a little bit.
Has it?
Yeah.
It's leveled off.
Well,
It
top
ha-
10 or something, we've gone down? Or?
Well, yeah, we're still in the top 10 nationally, but we're doing better in terms of New England.
Oh, are
Yeah.
we? Okay.
Yeah, New England is historically pretty high compared
Yeah.
to the rest of the country, and we've moved down a couple notches, I think, in
Yeah.
that.
So the next one on your list was the paid family leave program, which is financed through a new payroll tax.
Yep. It's should Vermont lawmakers mandate that all employees participate in a paid family leave program financed by a new payroll tax on employees. Yes, 12.79%, or 62 people, and no was 77.6%, or 371 people, and the don't know was just under 10%.
Okay,
at
back up just a little
45.
bit. This would be taken out of an employee's pay?
Yes, it's a payroll tax. So it would
I wonder
come.
how many really know that.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the reason we asked the question that way, because a lot of the time, and we were talking about the Doyle poll earlier,
Right.
they asked about this, but they only said, should Vermont have paid family leave?
Well, sounds great, right?
And it
Sign
sounds
me up.
great unless you know
Where the funding's coming
there's a
from.
benefit and there's a cost. So people don't know the cost. And the funny thing about that is when they originally proposed this paid family leave it's basically an insurance program that you're forced to buy into through the government. It was half would be paid by the employee and half would be paid by the employer, until they realized that who's the largest employer in the state? The state.
Yeah.
And the politicians said, we
Well,
don't
maybe
want
not.
to have to pay this tax because it would come directly out of their budgets. So they put it all onto the employee, and the really funny part about it is I think it was Representative Ann Donahue from Northfield when they were debating this in the House. It's already passed the House. It's
Yep,
now going to be
right.
taken up in the Senate, I think in the second half of the session. She put an amendment and said, why don't we just make this voluntary? It's an insurance program. If people really want
Right.
this benefit,
Well,
just
yeah,
tell them
right.
that they can pay it. And somebody stood up who was in favor of it and said, well, if we made it voluntary, nobody would buy it.
Duh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not have us pay those who have no children in plan? I'm not planning on taking
Well, the
any
other piece of
family leaves
making
in-
it non-voluntary is that it reduces the rate for the people who do actually want. It's kind of like unemployment insurance, right?
Right,
Which is
we all chip in. and
which
pay.
is it's the same concept, right? We all pay an employee tax on unemployment insurance that
Right.
goes into a pool, and you don't get to opt out of it. You have to pay it, and then it's there.
And this is for
Yeah.
elderly people too, right? It's not just
Well, it's-
family leave children. If you have to leave
Oh,
for
it's for a family
taking
member,
care,
yes. If you
taking
have
care
to-
of an elderly.
Yep, an elderly
person,
parent or
yeah.
and that's actually not clear in the bill how far the extended family
Define elderly.
goes. Yeah, well, I mean, my sixth cousin twice removed in
Oh, I see what
Hawaii
you're
is
saying.
sick, and I'm going there
I'll
for
go
5
help.
weeks.
Right.
We'll go help. Oh, this is the one we were talking about, enact a per parcel fee on Lake Champlain for cleanup.
Yep, that's the next one. Should Vermont lawmakers enact a per parcel fee on all Vermont land holdings to finance cleanup of Lake Champlain? 10% said yes, 48 people. No, 81%, or almost 82%. 390 people, and don't know was 8.18% at 39 people. So, and that's a tricky one because we do have to clean up our waterways, and we do have. I mean, the federal government is sort of, has the hammer over us.
Well, they
to
have
do
been
this.
threatening me, I just say, we haven't talked about this, they have threatened to come in and take over for quite a few years now, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember when I was back in state government, they were worried about the feds coming in and going, you people aren't doing what you're supposed to do. And I haven't heard much about it.
And we're still not doing what we're
And not
supposed to be.
doing- Exactly.
But we've been good enough at keeping the feds off our backs that we've been able to avoid that so far. But you're right. It gets to a bigger question of, if you're not going to pay through a per parcel fee, what are you going to do? Are you going to make the farmers pay for it? Are you going to make the municipalities pay for it? Like, who's going to? Because if you don't have a statewide funding mechanism in place, Burlington's going to pay for it. Rutland's going to pay for it. You're going to see it in your property taxes
Right.
anyway, because of all these municipal systems that need to be updated.
Yeah.
Or we're gonna have to do something with the farmers who have enough stuff to deal with right now that it's not going to be pretty.
No, it's not, and we do have to. This is a problem that needs to be solved. The
must
lake
say,
is a huge part of our
I think
economy.
it's a statewide problem, and I probably don't throw anything at me. I really don't want to say this. I feel bad for the per parcel fee. I mean, just because I'm sure they're paying higher taxes being on the lake and all that stuff. And why? I mean, the lake benefits us all, and it adds so much to the economic viability of the state. I don't think that they should just pick a segment of the population.
Right.
I'm gonna regret saying that. I'm sure when I get the
Well,
phone calls.
and it is. That's what's it's gonna be like. The biggest polluters are like Barre, Montpelier, Burlington, Rutland, and St. Albans. Those are the big cities that are the polluters, and then of course the farmers. And if you're gonna really make the people who are causing the pollution pay, it's gonna hurt a lot more for
Right.
those. for
Well,
those
they should
people.
fix it up and we should make them, but I think it's a problem that the lake cleanup's got to come from everybody. I
Right.
don't know what that looks like.
But I will throw in, I want to see a plan for actually cleaning the lake
Right.
before we put $50 million
Yeah, I don't
a
think they've
year
got
into
one
it.
yet.
And no, there's so many creative ideas out there for how to do it. I mean, they have these like floating wetlands. Have you seen these things? They're basically like these giant chia pets that you go out, they're filled with seeds.
Really?
And you float them out into the lake and they start to grow and the root systems suck up all the phosphorus.
Oh, neat.
And you can plant harvestable stuff, or you could maximize it for phosphorus, and it doesn't
Floating
seem like
rice paddies.
Yeah, you could have a floating
Boats
rice
can't go
paddy.
by, but,
Yeah.
rice paddy. But I mean, if you're at St. Albans Bay, what could it hurt? Just
Right.
Yeah.
do some of these things, and it's there's other.
I hadn't heard that.
There's other things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you could have like a giant pool cleaner out there.
Right.
Like we could call it Champ.
But give it a tail.
Yeah,
No,
that's
I do think that there's definitely things we can try that have not been tried, and there are things like controlled growing of algae, because we hear about these algae blooms that are
Yeah, they kill
bad.
dogs.
Right, but it's not the algae that's killing dogs. It's actually the neurotoxins that the types of algae that are blooming produce. But if you can use productive types of algae to soak up those the phosphorus and those other nutrients in the
cool.
water, and it's algae that you can use for other purposes. A good example of this is the Marine Corps actually has vertical harvesting of algae that they can turn into fuel for Humvees, for tanks, for all that stuff. The reason they're doing that is because they can grow it in a desert at a forward operating base, and they don't have a supply line behind them that can get cut off.
Neat.
And but you can use similar technology to harvest the excess phosphorus that's in our water.
Fuel the F-35.
Fuel. Don't tell anyone that. No, but no, it's the same idea. Or run a turbine, for an energy plant. You can even do things like taking the manure right off the farm, because that's one of the problems, is that farmers have to spread basically everything that all the manure that they produce, their cows produce, because if their manure pits overflow, they get hit with $20,000 or $30,000 worth of fines. So the incentive is to spread everything you can, because even regardless of how much the field actually needs. So changing the incentive structure where there's like a market to take that type of stuff, either a centrifuge or something that turns it into a usable product.
Yep. No, there are creative solutions
Yes,
out there.
because we had a plan, when I left the State House, there was a plan because we wanted to stall off the feds. And then I think the economy just sort of tanked, so we didn't have the money to implement the plan. And I don't know where that plan went. There was one back a few years ago. I can't remember when I was in the legislature last. I think 2010. But they had one because they didn't want the feds to come in.
It's kind of a cart before the horse scenario, right? Because the administration got into a little bit of hot water this past year about this, because they were like, legislators were like, well, you haven't spent all the money that we put into the fund last year. Why is that? And it was because the administration didn't want to move forward on engineering for a lot of the projects that were in the pipeline until they had the funding approved. But then, like, once the funding's approved, it's a year, 18 months
Sure.
worth of engineering work to get to make the project shovel
Exactly.
ready. So we're kind of still in that limbo phase of, hey, the
Right.
funding's there, but we're still doing 18 months of engineering work before we're ready to actually break ground on some of these projects. So we're kind of in that lag phase right now. That's
It's too bad because people want to see something happen.
right. People want to see something
I
happen.
think everybody wants to
Well,
see
it took
something
us
happen.
3 decades to get in this situation. It's going to take us a while to get out of it. So
And we did say on one of the shows we have found the problem, and it is us, because everybody's looking to New York and Canada, but in fact, we're the higher percentage of the problem, I think. Anyway,
Well-
so the last one that I picked out, because you have a couple more, but
Sure, we don't have to go through
Yeah,
all
I
of
didn't want, but the old gun control laws.
everyone's favorite subject
Yes,
right now.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so should Vermont lawmakers enact stricter gun control laws? Yes was 21%, almost 22 at 104 people. No was about 76% at 361, and don't know was 2.72 at just 13 people.
What's your take on this?
My take is that I think that the problems that we're facing are, well, we have an immediate problem, which we have to make our schools safer. And
Right.
I think enacting gun control laws
Just
isn't going
doesn't
to,
do
it
it.
doesn't do it.
Right, I agree.
So I don't see why people are so averse to putting guards on the schools. I mean, I brought this up the other night when we were at UVM, is you go over to the State House where they're making the laws to
Right,
repeal
right.
people's gun rights, and it's surrounded by people who are trained armed security guards and keeping them safe. And I wonder how many legislators would actually show up to that building if all of a sudden they said, we're going to take all those guys and send them home and put up gun-free zone signs. So that I think would be the first step, is put some people and secure the schools and make sure that they're safe that way. The way we keep our politicians safe, the way we keep our money safe with a bank guard, the way we keep our art safe in the museum with an armed guard. That make the schools safe. That's step one.
But there's nothing in any of the laws that do that.
No, there's nothing. And in fact, it's the pushback to that, to me, is just bizarre. And long term, I think that the real solutions we're going to find are cultural. I think that the real problem that we have is we have to ask ourselves, why are we producing so many young men today that are in a point where they think that gunning down a large number of people is a good idea, or an idea at all.
Right.
And I think that has more to do with a lot of things in the culture with violent movies. I'll just say entertainment, respect for people. I also think that there is a war on boys that we could talk about. I mean, everybody talks about the war on women, but really there's culturally there's a war on boys out there, because the way the schools work, it geared toward girls. Sit there quietly, pay attention. Boys are more hands-on. They're more, they want to get up. They're more tactile in the way they learn.
More hands-on, right?
They're more hands-on, and schools just aren't geared that way. And if you look at, girls are going to, they're graduating at higher rates than boys. They're going on to more secondary education than boys. I mean, I'm going to brag a little bit. My daughter was the valictorian of her high school class.
Oh, I didn't think we did that
year.
anymore, because people feel bad.
Maybe they don't. But as such, she was offered a scholarship at UVM, as all the valedictorians of the class were. We went to the ceremony for that, and all of a sudden, girl. They brought them all up one at a time, and it was girl, and it must have been 90%. I didn't start counting until I noticed a pattern, like 30% of the way through, but it was almost all girls, and I think boys are really being sort of left out. And
I haven't heard that on this food for thought.
And I think it's creating levels of frustration in young men is.
I'm here. Pay attention.
Yeah, I'm here. Pay attention.
Wow.
Is another way to. So Pat, one of the things that I suggested the other night at UVM, and I talked about it on the radio today, and I reached out to a member of Governor Douglas' staff to bring it up, is school choice. I think is a viable part of it, not the solution, but it's part of the solution, because if you've got a kid who feels isolated and from his peers, feels like nobody likes him, feels like he's being bullied, and really doesn't have an outlet for the school's not meeting his emotional needs. If it's not meeting his emotional needs, it's probably not meeting his academic needs. Yeah. We trap somebody in that situation to the point where there's no way out, there's no pressure valve. Pop. But if you have school choice and you give that student a chance to say, hey, this situation is not working out for me, you give them a chance to go to another school. It never gets to that point where it becomes a crisis. And if the kid really does have a problem, the kid saying, hey, I want to move someplace else, it brings the focus on that child. Right. And so when they do go to a new school, or if they decide that the child should stay in that school, they got an eye on where the problem might be.
And we have a long tradition of school choice. I mean, weren't we one of the first states that...
We were the first state.
The first state.
The first state.
The oldest program in 160 years.
Where is that now in discussion with the legislature? I mean, is it something they're promoting, or...
Definitely not something they're promoting, actually. It's there's a couple bills in play that would probably pull back on school choice and put more restrictions on independent schools that receive public tuitioning students. It's unclear where exactly those bills are going to go at this point, but there's definitely one moving forward in the Senate and potentially a couple in the House that might be in play.
Because I lived in New York for years, and they have high schools that focus on certain careers. And so you go to the high school that piques your interest, and so it's almost like school choice. It's just
it's magnet schools.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's the same concept.
It's the same thing. You pick, right? I mean, if you want to do engineering or whatever, or the arts, you go to the high school that fits your needs and your desires.
And one of the things I point out, like in Vermont, school choice has been known to be more of a rural thing in Vermont, where you might not have enough kids to really have a robust, elementary school or middle school
Right.
or high school, and so you're sending them to neighboring towns or to independent schools that are nearby to have that more robust experience. But Burlington has magnet schools, which really is a school choice function. It's within a public school setting. Like, you don't have an option to go to an independent school, but you have multiple options within the city of different middle schools that you can go to. You have a high school and you have a tech center. It's another choice that you have. You can choose to go to either one or both. I mean, so there's definitely, but people don't think about it that way. But it is inherently a school choice mechanism. It's just that, kind of changing that paradigm of, like, it's not so much about whether or not, you have, public vouchers or something like that. It's whether or not the kid has a choice about what school they want to go to.
Because
And they have
I've always
access to
thought,
that.
instead of labeling kids smart, not so smart, et cetera, you put them in classes that meet their learning style to get them interested. If they're hands-on, put them in a hands-on class or school.
Yeah.
And I think they would, I am not a teacher-student person. I mean, sitting in an auditorium with 1,000 kids and having somebody lecture to me would probably just be, that's just not who I am. I have to understand it and see it, feel it, and
Yep.
then I get it. So I think that kind of approach would work, and school choice can fit that need.
It can, and you look at the places where school choice has been around for a long time, and there are a lot of communities that have it in a certain region. The southern part of the state, surrounding Burr and Burton,
Yep.
we have the Long Trail School. You have the village school at North Bennington. You have the village, there are like 5 or 6 schools down there,
Yeah,
and then
I
of
know.
course up in the Northeast Kingdom, where you've got Linden Institute and St. Johnsbury Academy, Thaddeus Stevens, Burke Mountain School, all these different opportunities, as well as all the public school opportunities as well, where kids can go. And it's a really vibrant dynamic that is created with all these different schools with slightly different missions. And I think it's great for the kids and it's great for the parents. And I really do think we should be working to expand it. And more cheaply, and before we move off the topic of school choice, I'm going to suggest a guest to you if you haven't had him
Sure.
on. His name is Rick Gordon.
Oh,
and
we have not.
he's the head of the Compass School down in Westminster.
Really?
And this is, it's a wonderful independent school. And they, a lot of the pushback that you get is, only the wealthy can afford to go to the independent schools, which is crazy because in Vermont they give the poor kids a $15,000 voucher so the poor
All right.
can
That's
access
good.
all of these independent schools. But the Compass School is geared not toward the elite kids, it's geared towards kids who are, misfits, who
Oh.
aren't doing well in their public school.
Right.
And they come to the Compass School and they've got a 100% graduation rate. 90% of their kids go on to college, and it's just a wonder. It's a small school. It's about less than 100 students, but they are doing this for just the cost of the voucher, which is $15,000 a year. But they take about a third of each one of those vouchers and put it towards a scholarship. So they're really only educating their kids for about $11,000 a year,
my word,
which is
I love
about
this guy.
half.
We should have
half.
him come on.
So these are kids that would be on IEPs if they were in the public school
Right.
system, are being educated to a great level, a very high level, for about half the price of what a regular non-IEP student costs in a public school system. Incredible story, and
Let's have him
he'd be-
on.
he's
That
a he's a
sounds-
great
Like an
interview.
example, is anybody paying attention in the legislature? No.
couple
Could you-
people.
Yeah. Could you take on the, I don't know this bill S-221, so maybe you could-
S-221 is the Extreme Risk Protection Bill, but better known as the gun bill that came out of the Senate.
Yeah.
Right. That was voted out of the Senate 2 weeks ago. The legislature was on break last week, so nothing's gone on with it. But the House sent another bill back, and I'm trying to remember what the bill is because they didn't want to wait for 221 to come over from the Senate. So they basically copied the language, added a bunch of things to it, and sent that over to the Senate. So they kind of passed each other.
Is this the domestic violence where they can take
Domestic.
your gun?
Well, that's what it
Oh.
started as. Yeah,
Oh.
that's what it started as. And but this House version of the bill has all kinds of stuff in it. I'm trying to remember what the name is.
6 something.
6 something,
yeah,
645 or
675,
something like
670,
yeah. And so, do you know what's happening with S221 now and the House bill that's now over in the Senate?
Well, we won't know till they get back. But basically, the rumors I've been hearing is that there are a number of people in the Senate that want to stand fast for S221. That's certainly the position of the Second Amendment groups, Gun Owners of Vermont, the NRA.
They like the original version of the bill.
They like the original version of the bill. They worked with the Senate to craft it. It passed the Senate 30-0. Bipartisan. The furthest left and the furthest right came together and said they think this is a good idea. But the House, the theories are that it's an ego thing between the House Judiciary Committee chair and the Senate Judiciary Committee chair. And the Senate Judiciary chair put this bill together, and the House Judiciary chair is saying, well, we can do a better job than you. And we'll see where it ends up, because Governor Scott has said that he's interested in signing a bill. My wonder is, are the House members going to push this to the point where the governor can no longer sign it because it goes too far? Or will he sign whatever they send him because he said he wanted to sign something? That, to me, is where the real mystery lies.
And if I had to bet, if it does come down to a battle of the chairs, I would my money would be on the Senate chair. Just knowing who that is, exactly. My money's with the Senate.
Let me just ask you something. Most Vermonters have more than one gun in their house. We had this discussion before the show. And nobody knows how many guns people have. There's no registry, thank goodness, anywhere. So if you pick up the gun in a domestic dispute on the table, you may have gotten that gun, but there's...
and just
they're going to ask you, give me your guns? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and just for our viewers to understand what S221 was originally, it allowed police officers to remove firearms from a house where a domestic violence incident was alleged to have occurred. So they get a call, a domestic violence incident has occurred, they show up, there's a gun lying on the table, they can the bill essentially would allow them to confiscate that gun for 5 days.
That could be one of many.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Could be one of many. The bill that passed the Senate had all these restrictions on it where, yes, the cop can take that gun, but they have to get a court order first, so they have to go get an expedited court order to take the gun, and all these other. So there's a whole bunch of checks and balances, and then you can petition to get it back, and there's a whole process for that. So it was a lot of the stuff on the Senate side was about working out the process for what that should look like.
It was to maintain due process for loss of property.
Right,
I mean, it was a legal argument.
Right, exactly.
A constitutional argument.
And if you ask all the gun folks until 2 weeks ago, this was a due process bill, not a gun bill, and now it's, the vernacular has changed.
Now where are we now?
The Senate bill is still the same.
Kitchen sink is in it?
Well, the Senate bill is still the same. The House bill has all kinds of stuff in there. There's expanded background checks. I think there's potentially a magazine piece in there that they were looking. I can't remember if that made it into the final version.
I don't remember either.
Why isn't anyone saying in Vermont that say something worked here?
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we thank God
that
we were able to stop the young man from continuing with his plans, or God forbid, execution.
The person that he was talking to was in New York, right? And the person in New York went to their local police department and said something, and then the New York police department got in touch with the Vermont one, and then they were investigating and fairly quickly realized that this individual had bought a gun recently,
right?
And that's what triggered the arrest, was that
there was a lot of misunderstanding on Facebook, my favorite thing to do. When
really there's misunderstanding on Facebook?
Exactly, I know,
What?
it's a shock. But where they talked about a father could give his son under 21 or under 18 a gun, and that's okay. And it was back and forth trying to clarify that. So. And then Youth Day can happen, but how can it happen if you don't have a gun? I think there's a lot of confusion over trying to make this bill make everybody happy, and I don't think it can.
That was the other thing I think that was in the House version of the bill, is there's an age trigger on purchasing a gun. And currently, under current law, the only age trigger is for handguns. There's no age trigger for rifles, essentially.
Huh. Interesting. So do you want to keep that.
Sure. There's a whole bunch of things to talk about. I mean, Rob, you and I can go on forever. But one of the interesting things I think this year that is holding true from last year is Governor Scott holding the line on the budget. He's been very adamant about that, even to the point of not allowing this inadvertent tax increase from the federal bill to affect Vermonters. Just by virtue of the Fed. The federal AGI changing. The AGI went up, but the rate went down, so most taxpayers, on the federal level anyway, are seeing a benefit from that. The problem on the state level is AGI went up, but the tax rates didn't do anything.
Yep.
So
AGI, adjusted gross income.
Right, adjusted gross income. And so that would inadvertently result in a $30 million tax increase on Vermonters and state taxes. The governor said, I've promised to hold the line on taxes, so even this inadvertent increase, we're not just going to roll it into the budget and consider it a freebie. We're going to try to hold people harmless.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on on holding the line? Is there anything that you feel like the legislature is pushing back on, or is there?
Well, I think it was. I commend the governor for holding the line, and I think that returning that money to the taxpayers is a good idea. But the fact that they've rolled it in with the education funding bill, I don't think shows good faith on the part of the legislature.
Well, we were just talking with the tax commissioner last week about this, and tying it in with a bill that's pretty mired in problems at this point. They set out to simplify the education tax code, and I think they've probably complicated it further.
Right.
Well, they have. I mean, in fact, I was telling Pat before the show on a radio show that I do, Common Sense Radio with Bill Sayre on WDEV. 11 to noon on weekdays.
You can plug that.
We get a little plug in there,
Yeah, we had Fred Bazier, who's on the committee that was putting this together, on to interview, and we said that the reason that they were originally looking at this, shifting some of the education funding from the property tax to the income tax, was to simplify the system, to eliminate the income sensitivity provisions of the property tax, replace it with a progressive income tax. So still helping people who are lower income not pay as much as people who are higher income.
Right.
And to create create transparency, so simplify so people could understand it, and then also to put pressure on people to vote. If you vote for an increase in your school budget, it's going to be reflected in your bill,
right? Which
would put downward pressure on budgets in the future. So he asked Fred, okay, Fred, so now that you've kicked this thing around for the first half of the legislative session, is it simplified? No, actually it's more complicated than it was before because they wanted to make sure that the income sensitivity still existed within the income tax structure, which makes the income tax structure extremely complicated.
Right.
You still have the property tax element, which becomes more complicated. And then we asked, and they, because they wanted to put the income sensitivity back into it to the same degree that it was in the previous or the current system. There was no longer any downward pressure linked to your vote. So if it's not simpler and it's not putting downward pressure on budgets, why are you doing this?
Right.
And he kind of chuckled and hemmed and hawed for a second. He said, well, I voted against it. At the end of the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got this whole mess that is shouldn't go anywhere at this point. I mean, there are a lot of people who are advocates for the poor. There are accountants out there looking at higher income people saying this isn't going to be really going to work. So please slow down. Don't necessarily do this year. And then you attach the tax cut. Or it's not a tax cut, but it's
the hold harmless.
The hold harmless language to this mess of a bill. You have to wonder what the politics are behind this move.
Because it's a very popular piece that they're trying to stick into something that could potentially not be so popular.
Yeah. Well, I think they're trying to back Governor Scott into a position where, are you going to vote for, if you vote against shifting to the income tax to pay for education, then you're going to be voting against or vetoing this hold harmless bill. So you've, in fact, voted for a tax increase.
Right. So I think what's probably going to happen, because I have been following that bill, and I think probably what's going to happen is the Finance Committee in the House is probably going to strip some of that stuff out of the bill. This is what the administration's asking for. The tax commissioner is asking to separate the two bills. And there's still some good pieces in, at least one good piece that's in that bill that's related to education, which is, as you were saying, further coupling your spending decisions at the local level with your tax rates.
People would love that.
And yes
They
and
could
no.
see if they spend, if they get this tax, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it would keep the same funding formula in place. But what would happen is when under the Act 68 funding formula, right, which is the one that's in place
Right.
now, you spend $1 more on your school budget, and your equivalent tax rate is about a 40-cent increase. So for $1 of spending, your tax rate only reflects about 40 cents. The rest of it is absorbed in the statewide property tax pool. Under this bill, in terms of aside from splitting how the revenues are being
Right.
created, you spend $1 more on
Get it.
your school budget, you're going to get taxed about 95 cents more equivalent, right? On your local tax rate. It's not going to the state. So that really couples those local spending.
Right.
The problem, which lies, is that about half of the districts are going to be winners and half of them are going to be losers, right? So half the districts are going to have a lower tax rate overnight. Half the districts that are higher spenders are going to see a higher tax rate overnight. So there's going to be some pains in the implementation phase.
Does that even
But-
meet my, what is it, Briggs?
Yeah, as long as there's a straight line, it meets Brigham.
Does it?
So it's just the slope of the line. Right now, it's a lower slope.
Because
So
when you're saying some will see less, some will see more, that doesn't seem to fly in
because it's all
the
based
Brigham
on your
decision.
cost per student. So as long as two districts that are spending $10,000 a student have the same tax rate, you're fine. So as long as that line is straight, right? It doesn't matter if it's a 45-degree angle or if it's a 20-degree angle. It's
Makes no sense to me because $1 in here may not be what you get for $1 in Burlington. I don't.
That's why
That
it's not.
part drives me crazy.
That's why they've decoupled it from the local grand list.
Yeah.
Because your grand list, Burlington's grand list is a lot different than Montpelier's grand list. If you had $1 tax rate in Burlington, that's raised a whole lot more money than $1
Right.
tax rate in Montpelier. That's why we have a statewide
But it's the
base
purchase
now.
power. What you get for that $1 in Burlington is not what you might get somewhere else.
Granted, yeah, that's true. But we now have a statewide grand list to try to even some of that out, and that's why we have our current funding formula is based on a cost per student model instead of a property value model. So
Clear as mud, I'd
lots
say.
lots of
They've
things.
done a great job once again.
Lots of things to talk about. One of the more interesting ones on here on our list is the correctional facility that's proposed for St. Albans. Have you guys looked at that at all, or have any thoughts?
Just a little
on
bit.
it?
I mean,
Yeah.
I spent some time talking with Corey Parent, who's the representative from St. Albans, about that, I think it's an intriguing idea. It sounds like it would be a much more humane facility than that what exists. It would allow.
And shipping people to Kentucky
Yeah,
or
exactly,
whatever we're
which
doing,
is-
yeah.
Well, even the ones in Vermont, it sounds
Yeah.
like it would be somewhat integrated, where you'd have different
Services right
services
there on campus.
right
Yeah.
there on campus for people. You wouldn't have to, as you point out, ship people to Pennsylvania or Kentucky or wherever, so to be rehabilitated in the communities where they, or close to the communities where they live. But I haven't really heard very much about where it stands. Have you been?
As far as I know, it's still pending. I mean, this is the way that I've heard it phrased is this is one of several options, and this is just happens to be the first one to the table for the legislature to consider, and it's going to be a long, drawn-out process. Quite honestly,
Well, I know the VSEA is obviously against it because of the outside contractor,
Right.
use of outside contractors,
Yep.
which is a big thing for the legislatures, what they
Totally.
think.
Well, that's a lot of where the pushback's been
Yeah,
so
right.
far. But everyone loves the idea of bringing our people back. But
And from what I understand, there was an interesting financing
Yep,
there is an
Right.
interesting
proposal
yeah.
for it,
Right.
which
It's a
I
public-private
Yeah.
split
Yeah.
type of deal.
It's basically they'll invest in it for us. The outside company would pay to have the prison built, and then we would buy it back or something.
Right.
We would buy it back after 20 years.
Yeah,
I
we
think.
buy it back after 20 years.
Yeah, something like that.
I think having the services right there because of the mental health issues in corrections, it's just overwhelming, and we need to do something.
And we were talking
about
with someone
that.
about this, where part of it is they're going to have a mental health facility in the campus because
Is
it's
that
going
Dean
to.
George was talking about
I think it
that?
may have. No, I'm not sure who it was, but because currently the state hospital, which only has 32 beds, something like that,
30.
is taking all of those folks and tying up beds that could be used for the general public as opposed to
Right.
beds that are for correctional facilities. So having a separate facility for the corrections folks makes a lot of sense
Right.
because they need different parameters. It needs to be more secure, that type of thing. So.
That's great.
So anything that we have about 3 minutes left. Anything that you're
Yeah.
dying to talk about that we can, I mean, there's a whole lot we could
I'd
talk
like to
you
know what you think is going to happen the next session, next
We're at
part of
that-
this session.
the halfway point.
Yeah, the
We're,
halfway.
we're at the halfway point. Well, I think it's really going to come down to the end. What I'm interested to see is, Governor Scott has said that he will not support anything that has a new tax or a new fee. So I think that the second half of the legislative session is really going to come down to that standoff, because you're going to see a $15 minimum wage, probably, paid family leave. I suppose it's possible that the House and Senate come together and they pick one or two of those bills. You're going to see something for some sort of tax for lake cleanup. There are a number of other bills out there that I've seen that contain fees. If there's a background check for guns, the background would contain a fee. Mm-hmm. And the governor said that he's interested in possibly signing it, but it would contain a fee. So there's a question there.
Right.
Yep. How is he going to handle that? And then there's the political fallout from there going into the election. I think, does he become governor veto, where he all these things come forward and he vetoes all of them, or is he going to then moderate his position and say, well, I don't want to veto everything?
But then, that he's put his position of, is he going to veto everything, or is he going to go back on the promise that he made?
Exactly.
And which one, going into an election year is a tricky thing. And that could be
Yep.
part of the strategy, quite honestly,
Yep.
from the leadership in the House to try to get as many things on his desk that he has to veto as possible.
Well,
'cause
they
that's,
told us when we were interviewing them that they were not happy with last year's end of session.
Yeah, there's no, they're not particularly thrilled with the administration after last year.
No, but I personally, I hope that he does veto a lot of things, and I think that they're throwing Scott into the briar patch.
Yep, see what he does.
And because a lot of the things
See how much sticks.
because a lot of the things that they're pushing for really aren't that popular.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this gun control stuff plays out in the election. Historically, that's not a good issue to get involved with. You saw that with Sue Minter even.
Yep.
That probably tanked her campaign right there. That one issue alone.
Well, the carbon tax certainly added fuel to that fire.
Yeah,
too,
and there's those two issues, and you have a candidate running on the left end of the spectrum that potentially is very strong on guns, depending on how he brands himself. So it could be an interesting race. Who knows?
It really could be.
Yeah.
We were talking before the show, and you've looked at the list of bills, and when we had the representatives from the House, they said, oh, well, the end of the deadline for submitting bills, once that passes, there's going to be a flurry of bills that represent what they've heard from constituents. It's not. The list of bills is pretty sad. There's nothing on the economy, on jobs. I mean, obviously, this education is supposed to be doing something on property tax, but who knows if it's even going to pass. It's very sad, the list.
Yeah.
You've looked at it. Is
Yeah.
there anything there that sticks out and goes, oh, they're paying attention?
There's really not much
Yeah.
of anything in terms of economics. There's really nothing, quite honestly.
Rob, we have come to the end of the show. Told you it goes fast.
It
so
does. It's
thank
been a
you
lot of
very
fun.
much.
Thank you very much for having me, Pat. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for being
tuning in.
on.
We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.